This is AEDT 2150U, Digital Technologies and Advanced Teaching Methods. The title for this particular video clip is Gap Analysis and Writing Learning Objectives or Competencies. Once James writes tasks that his learners need to do, he will need to determine what is the ideal scenario and do the equation in order to figure out what is missing for the workers to perform their jobs, and eventually increase the kitchen cabinet sales by 50% in the next 6 months. In this particular case, James found out that there was both a lack of knowledge and a lack of know-how to sell the product. While one often leads to the other, James has to tackle the problem systemically. He figures that increasing the knowledge of the product should give the employees more confidence to sell the product. However, James is aware that knowing a product is not enough to sell it. Customers have to feel confident that they are buying the right thing and that the salesperson is knowledgeable and trustable. How will James fill this gap in a 20-hour course? The analysis questions for this particular video clip are as follows. What are the components of learning objectives? What are the components of competencies? What is the difference between the two? Writing learning objectives is not a simple task. Here's the definition of a learning objective. Learning objectives are statements of goal that learners should be able to perform after completing the learning intervention. In a learning program or a performance improvement intervention, objectives must be described in observable and measurable terms. There are 3 types of objectives: the cognitive domain, the psychomotor domain, and the affective domain. In the cognitive domain, the learner recalls or recognizes the knowledge and develops intellectual abilities and skills. In the psychomotor domain, the learner develops physical skills and is able to perform some actions. In the affective domain, the learner changes his interests and attitudes and values. When writing learning objectives, you have to think about a few things. First, you have to identify and define the purpose, the learner, characteristics, and the content. You also have to specify the goal of the objectives, and you have to try to be as specific or precise as possible. You have to use a concrete action verb. For example, to know is not a concrete action verb, but to name something is something that you can actually observe and measure. You also have to develop assessment and evaluation criteria to ensure that your learning objective has been met. And you also have to ensure that objectives align with instructional goals. Let's look at the anatomy of a learning objective. A learning objective is also called an instructional objective. There are 3 components to learning objectives. First, there's a description of the terminal behavior or actions that will demonstrate learning. This includes a description of the actions that the learner can show that will demonstrate what has been learned. Learning objectives also include a description of the condition of demonstration of that action. This describes the tools or informations that will be given when they demonstrate their learning and usually start with given. And a learning objective also includes a description of the standard or criterion, and this describes how well the learner must do for you to say that the learner has achieved the objective. For example, the accuracy, the number of error or correct responses, the time to performance, the consistency with established standards, and etc. This is an example of a learning objective. The terminal behavior in this case is to run 5 kilometers. The condition is in the rain with no shoes. And the standard or criterion is in 10 minutes. So if you were to write a learning objective for this task, you would say, given rainy conditions and the fact that the learner has no shoes, the learner will run 5 kilometers in 10 minutes or within 10 minutes successfully. This is an example of a learning objective. Learning objectives are usually written using Bloom's taxonomy, the taxonomy of instructional or educational objectives. It was written by a committee that Benjamin Bloom chaired and later became known as Bloom's taxonomy. This taxonomy was written to help educators provide a holistic form of education by targeting the three domains mentioned before: cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. Bloom's taxonomy is presented as a cognitive skills hierarchy. It starts with knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. And Bloom's taxonomy is usually depicted as a pyramid or as a hierarchy that starts with the bottom and goes up to evaluation. So in any case, it starts with knowledge, moves up to comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, which is the highest cognitive skill. Each of these skills had measurable and observable matching verbs that could be assessed and evaluated. I'm giving you the link of an inventory of verbs to help you write your own learning objectives. Simply click on this link or make a search on Wikipedia and find Bloom's taxonomy, and you will find the list of verbs. Moving on to James' needs assessment, we remember that the employees needed to gain more knowledge about the product, but also needed some sales skills. In the case of an operation that can be observed and measured, a sales skills could be written as a learning objective. But James noticed that the employees needed more than just skills. They needed to become competent salespeople because, in some cases, they would be faced with new situations. Selling kitchen cabinets is not a one-size-fits-all situation. Many people are going to have kitchens that don't quite match the product offered by the company, and some people are going to have odd requests. It is in answering odd requests efficiently that the stores will be able to distinguish themselves from their competitors. Writing competencies is a bit more complex than writing an instructional objective. Competencies are not as specific as learning or instructional objectives. Here are some examples of competencies. Apply the appropriate learning theory or pedagogical approach to design a learning program. Choose the appropriate technology to produce recommendations. Configure methodology to design and implement a learning program systemically. Adapt learning programs, systems, and technologies to the environment in which they will be used. How are competencies different from learning objectives? Let's look at a definition. A competency is a set of information or knowledge that I can mobilize to accomplish a task or to solve a problem. The synthesis questions for the following video clip are as follows. When should a course designer or a teacher write learning objectives? When should a course designer or teacher write competencies? What are the outcomes of learning objectives? And what are the outcomes of competencies?